Hello everyone, it's Miss Smith. Today's lesson is going to involve you reading a short story by Ray Bradbury in the science fiction genre. So I just wanted to introduce both of those things, the genre and the author, to you before we got started today. The short story is called A Sound of Thunder. I'm going to be modeling how to read his work using another story, which I'll go over in just a minute. But both stories are in the science fiction genre. Now, the science fiction genre has other subgenres within it that we have read stories from. We've read some dystopian fiction, like when we read The Lottery. That is a subgenre of science fiction. There's also things like fantasy fiction, supernatural fiction, space operas and space westerns, cyberpunk, steampunk. All of those are subgenres within science fiction. Science fiction as a genre, though, is a genre of speculative fiction that contains imagined elements that don't exist in the real world. Science fiction spans a wide range of themes that often explore things like time travel, space travel. They might be set in the future and deal with the consequences of technological and scientific advances. Common characteristics of science fiction are listed there. Science fiction is often called the literature of ideas. Sci-fi novels include a wide variety of futuristic concepts. Since they're so imaginative, anything is possible, especially in soft sci-fi novels. A sci-fi novel can be about space, time travel, aliens, or time-traveling aliens in space. Regardless of the setting and characters, all sci-fi stories are complex, contain nuanced detail, and explore larger themes and commentary, sometimes satirically, about society beneath the surface. The classic elements of a science fiction novel include time travel, teleportation, mind control, telepathy and telekinesis, aliens, extraterrestrial life forms and mutants, space travel and exploration, interplanetary warfare, parallel universes, fictional worlds, alternative histories, speculative technology, and superintelligent computers and robots. You might see any of those in a science fiction text, although it might not contain any of those elements. The author that we're going to be reading today is Ray Bradbury. His most famous work is probably Fahrenheit 451, which some of you may have been required to read in a previous grade. It is ranked as like one of the most important science fiction texts to be published. It's also an example of a dystopian book. Ray Bradbury was called by the New York Times in his obituary as the writer most responsible for bringing modern science fiction into the literary mainstream. In other words, like he made science fiction one of the popular genre that it is today. And he earned a Pulitzer citation, which means that the people who award the Pulitzer Prize gave him this other prize. They haven't done it that many times, given out Pulitzer citations. It just means that they didn't get the official Pulitzer Prize, but he is so important that they ended up giving him this other prize, which is also really, really highly esteemed. So I'm going to show you how to read Ray Bradbury's work by looking at another one of his short stories that I absolutely adore, called Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed. This was something that I read in high school and just remember loving since then. Like years later, I remember reading this text in class and just adoring it. So as I'm reading, I'm going to be doing what I typically do, which is I'm going to be annotating the text. 3 things that I really want to focus on while I'm reading this is setting, tone, and characterization. Ray Bradbury does an exceptional job of establishing the setting in his work, giving us a sense of place, even though what his stories are about are all fiction. So one of the things that you're going to have to write about when we are done reading his text, A Sound of Thunder, is you're going to have to answer the question, how does he make his stories feel real, even though they're imagined and they include a lot of like fantastical elements? So we're going to look at setting. We're going to look at tone, which remember is like the mood that the characters or the readers are experiencing that he's creating throughout the piece. And then characterization, specifically how he's setting up characters to give us certain motivations and helping us realize how much they change throughout the piece. So I'm going to start reading and annotating. The rocket metal cooled in the meadow winds. So already this first sentence is giving me so many sensory details, like the cooling metal, and then I can experience the winds, and then I can see that we're in a meadow and a rocket is in that meadow. So already I'm getting a sense of setting with some sensory details. I can really imagine like I'm there, and he's really starting again, not with like, they were on a ship and they were traveling to Mars, but we just landed. The rocket metal cooled. So I can tell that we were just landing and it was hot, now it's cooling, and we were landing in a meadow. Its lid gave a bulging pop. So now I'm getting that sensory detail of hearing as well. From its clock interior stepped a man, a woman, and 3 children. The other passengers whispered away across the Martian meadow, leaving the man alone among his family. Now, I'm going to note 2 things here about both setting and tone. So another thing that I'm getting from the setting is I'm getting the noises of the setting. So I've got the winds, I've got the pop, and now the passengers are whispering away. So they're moving, but he's describing it as whispering. So I'm just kind of imagining that, like when we walk across grass, it's got that like whoosh, 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 and everything's kind of a soft noise as they leave across the meadow. I'm also seeing that there's maybe not anything else around. A meadow is just grass, and now I see that the family is standing there by themselves. So it's giving me a sense of place in just this first paragraph. I'm also going to start to see some examples of tone here. So I'm seeing words like alone, and when they're whispering away, along with the sound of the wind, is making me feel a little bit eerie. I'm seeing the wind, or seeing and hearing the wind. There's this loneliness. Those kinds of things make me, I don't know about you, but uncomfortable. When I'm just hearing like the wind blowing, nothing really is around me, somebody standing alone. The man felt his hair flutter and the tissues of his body draw tight, as if he were standing at the center of a vacuum. Again, I'm getting a really great sense of maybe being uncomfortable. So if you can feel your hair in the breeze, maybe that's a sensory detail about setting, but it also kind of goes along with that sense of the wind blowing. But if the tissues are drawing tight, that means he's kind of clenching up. And then I also see that it's like he's standing in a vacuum. Again, a very uncomfortable scene that he's setting, even though it's kind of beautiful. We've got this meadow, a family standing in the middle of it. It's kind of like a painting. These feelings that I'm getting are not that great. I haven't really seen a very positive adjective or verb yet. His wife before him seemed almost to whirl away in smoke. Now, we start with the man. So we're going to get some information about the characters here. It does describe that there was a man, a woman, and 3 children in order in the first paragraph. Now we're getting a little more descriptive about them in the second paragraph, but again, it's in the same order. So I'm wondering if the man is the most important, and that's why he introduced him first multiple times when introducing these characters. Sorry, it looks like I spelled that wrong, but that's a P-O-R. Next we see, so he's feeling uncomfortable. He's feeling like he's being clenched and sucked into a vacuum. Then we see his wife whirling away in smoke. So already I'm wondering like, okay, he's feeling uncomfortable. Is she just kind of the person to go along with everything? And that's why he's describing that? Or is that just something about setting where it's kind of just telling us that she's emerging from the smoke of the rocket ship. I might have to read more to see what Ray Bradbury intended when he described the woman to be whirling away in smoke. Maybe she also, instead of as somebody who goes along with something, kind of ends up disappearing, ends up disappearing from her husband, distancing herself from her husband throughout the piece. And that's why she's described as whirling away in smoke. And then we see the children are the third people to be described. Small seeds might at any instant be sown to all the Martian climes. So they also look like they might be just kind of drifting about and become like little Martian children. It just seems like they're really small and delicate. We're getting a sense of who they are and where they are in space and how this man is perceiving them. But we're also getting a little bit of a sense of who they are. So not blue-green, sorry. Getting my colors mixed up. Maybe who they are in the story. The authors can do that. They're very intentional about the words that they choose and where they place them. The children looked up at him as people look to the sun to tell what time of their life it is. His face was cold. Okay, here I'm getting another sense of the tone from this, not only the short sentence, but also just, again, the adjectives he's using. So they're looking up to his father to say, what are we supposed to make of all this land and this new place? And the dad looks cold. So maybe unfeeling, maybe like he's feeling uncomfortable. And again, we can kind of get that from the dialogue. So we see a lot of direct characterization where he's giving us some direct descriptions of them. But we can also get a sense of who these characters are through their actions, their dialogue, and their thoughts. So here we see his wife giving us a clue about how this man is responding to the situation through her question, what's wrong? Let's get back on the rocket. Go back to Earth? Yes, listen. All right, so again, we're getting a sense of kind of eeriness or discomfort because immediately he suggests, let's go home. So if he's feeling uncomfortable, as readers, we're also going to start to feel his discomfort if the writer is a great writer, which Ray Bradbury is. The wind blew as if to flake away their identities. Now, like I mentioned before, that wind was more than just a way to get us imagining the story. It's also there to make us feel uncomfortable with the tone, as if the winds are going to sweep away who they are. Now, could this also be all three, where it's giving us a description of the setting, it's giving us this eerie tone, and maybe it's going to tell us something about how these characters work throughout the story. Perhaps they are going to start becoming different as time goes on in this Martian land. At any moment, the Martian air might draw his soul from him. Now it's getting almost a little bit like horror, because we're seeing if his soul is sucked out of him, then that's something too that's like kind of a terrifying thought. As marrow comes from a white bone, he felt submerged in a chemical that could dissolve his intellect and burn away his past. Now, we've got some words here. The word choice is adding to that eerie tone. Submerged in a chemical makes us think about like just like an acid bath, which is terrifying. We see the word dissolve and burn, but also we're getting a sense of maybe how he's interpreting this situation, because he makes it feel like this wind, this landscape is going to make me feel dumb, and it's going to make everything that's happened to me before landing on Mars like it never happened. They looked at Martian hills that time had worn with a crushing pressure of years. They saw the old cities, lost in their meadows, lying like children's delicate bones among the blowing lakes of grass. So here, a fantastic description of setting where we're getting an opportunity to really picture what this is like, but not only, again, give us a picture, it's really giving us a history of the area. So We see that the Martian hills must have been there for a long time. There's old cities there, which are interesting. Did Martians set up that city, those cities? Did people set up those cities? Why are there old cities on Mars? Or has this travel just been going on for a long time? And then we see blowing lakes of grass, which if you've ever seen a meadow, when the wind blows on the grass, it does make it look like water. And then again, we're adding to the tone by describing the setting and comparing it to children's delicate bones. When you think of children's bones lying in grass, that is a horrific image. Chin up, Harry, said his wife. It's too late. We've come over 60 million miles. So now we're getting a sense of who she is. Harry is somebody who's uncomfortable with the situation. Maybe we'll see him change throughout. He wants to turn around. But we can kind of get a sense through this dialogue and how she's handling the situation. So through her dialogue and her response to what's happening, who his wife is. Like, she must be quite an optimist. Okay, it's too late. We can't turn around. Let's chin up. Let's try and take the best of what's happening here. The children with their yellow hair hollered at the deep dome of Martian sky. Now, again, when we describe something as deep, the deep dome of Martian sky, I'm feeling a little lost in it, which is again, giving me a sense of like endlessness. Like maybe there's like no like escape. There's no exit route. There was no answer but the racing hiss of wind through the stiff grass. And again, I'm noticing every time he starts to set up the tone as a little eerie, he's describing the wind. So maybe that wind is as a clue about how, sorry, I think that should be blue for the setting. Blue. Maybe the wind is some sort of symbol in this. So is wind a symbol? You know, we didn't really talk about symbolism, but perhaps every time I see the wind, I'm going to see kind of, again, me start to shiver, and it's an indication of how eerie it is. He picked up the luggage in his cold hands. Here we go, he said. A man standing on the edge of a sea, ready to wade in and be drowned. All right, again, perhaps foreshadowing, creating an eerie tone, and it's giving me a description of the setting, but also perhaps of his characterization. He is ready to be drowned. He's ready for a terrible experience. And then they walked into town. And although we're only 13 lines into a massive story, I'm going to stop here. I want to zoom out and take a look at what I was doing while I was reading. So I annotated as I went. I really noted specific instances of Bradbury creating setting, of creating tone, and of creating characterization. Now, I not only just like color coded them, but I also made notes. So I noted things like, oh, I can tell that she's an optimist. I didn't just underline it and say or think, okay, that's characterization, but what specifically is this text telling me about the wife? She's an optimist. What exactly am I getting out of the tone? I'm getting a sense of endlessness or no escape. I'm also making guesses in my margins about maybe some foreshadowing. I did some metacognitive thinking over here with dialogue and the response to situations. I'm saying, how can characters be characterized? And then, again, I'm noting things on here like, what is the tone? Again, tone. How, metacognitive thinking here. How did I get a sense of the tone? Because it was a short sentence. Made me kind of chilly. I am making guesses over here. Making guesses with characterization over here. Because at the beginning, yes, I'm getting some maybe direct sense of the children were small. But when I'm getting a description of a character at the beginning, it's likely to be important or change throughout the piece. So at this point, I'm just using it to make inferences about what this might mean for the rest of the story. So I'm hoping that you will do the same thing with Ray Bradbury's next story, which is A Sound of Thunder. The text that you're going to get is going to look like, this, where it's got some color coding that go along with questions. You are not required to answer these questions. They're just for further thought. These little footnotes here give you some important notes about vocabulary, so take a look out for that. And then when you are done reading this piece, there are going to be checks for understanding. So you're going to get 20 questions, 10 true or false questions, and 10 multiple choice questions to check that you read and to, again, get you in the mindset of like what we do usually with texts in school. So when you're given something like the MCAT test, the SAT, the ACT, it's going to give you a text and then multiple choice questions. So this is getting you in the mindset of the kind of multiple choice questions they ask. Most of these questions are going to be about plot. You obviously will have the text to look back to see whether or not, what the question's asking you actually happened. So that's helpful. But I highly recommend, if you have the opportunity to print this out or to use a program to annotate, I highly recommend annotation. It's hard to see over here, so that you can track your own thinking. You can note some specific maybe shifts in character or plot, which is actually going to be a huge piece of A Sound of Thunder. So I recommend that you start from the beginning with annotation because you might notice some things change throughout your reading. You can even start with the questions on your screen so that you know what to look for as you're annotating. All right, and I hope that was helpful, my little read aloud, think aloud model for you. I hope you loved this story, A Sound of Thunder. I really did. It includes hunting, dinosaurs, time travel, terrible consequences, an election, a lot of really interesting components, and some great characterization. And obviously, as usual, Ray Bradbury will show us really exemplary setting. He describes the setting in really incredible ways. All right, if you have any questions, let me know.